Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the second of our two symposium sessions on film education during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Flip Klakovic. I'm part of the team at the Film Education Journal, which is an online open access publication. I'm also joined today by our editor, Jamie Chambers, who's going to be helping to moderate the chat today. And just a few bits of housekeeping before we begin. You'll probably see the symbol at the top left of your screen, which shows that we're recording this conversation and we will be uploading it to YouTube after the session and sending this out to everyone via Eventbrite. When you come into the event, your mics have been muted and we'd ask if you could continue to keep them muted throughout the discussion, just to ensure that sound remains at optimum levels. But please do put any questions or comments into the chat, and Kerry, Jamie, or myself will pick them up. And also, if you have any contributions that you actually want to make verbally, please just mention that in the chat as well, and we can unmute you as well if there's something you'd like to say. And finally, we're in the process of finalising our programme for our upcoming Film Education Conference. This takes place on the 17th and the 18th of June. It's online, it's free to attend, and we would love to see you there. We'll be sharing the registration link to that in the chat as well. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to pass over to Kerry Abercrombie, who's a teacher of English and Media at Larbert High School in Falkirk. She's chairing today's discussion and will be introducing our speakers. Over to you, Kerry.
Thank you so much, Flip. Hello, everyone, and welcome, as Flip said, to this Film Education Journal Spring Symposium event. This evening, we're going to be talking about film education in Scottish schools during the COVID-19 pandemic. So before we start, I just want to give you a little idea of what is in store. So we have our wonderful panel of film education specialists with us today, and we'll meet them in just a little second. But it's just to let you know that this is going to be a pretty informal discussion, which is going to last around 30 minutes or so, with time, as Flip said, for Q&A at the end. So please do just put those questions in the chat as and when they come to you, and Flip and Jamie will make sure that they come to me and we can get the panel's thoughts on them. So let's introduce the people involved today. We are very, very fortunate to have a total of more than 40 years worth of film education experience on the call today, not to make us sound old or anything like that. But there's a wealth of experience here, and hopefully that's going to make for some very interesting, lively and inspiring chat. So I'm just going to start with myself. My name is Kerry Abercrombie, your host for this panel. As Flip said, I'm a media and English teacher at Larbert High School, which is one of the largest secondary schools in Scotland. And I'm actually on secondment at the moment. So I have been teaching film remotely to higher media and to our School of Media students, but that was way back at the sort of end of last academic year. So the panel actually have way more experience than me in delivering film education remotely. So what we're going to do is just ask everybody to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Kirsty. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi there, my name's Kirsty Brown. I'm Faculty Head of English and Media at Hyndland Secondary School, which is a large comprehensive in the West End of Glasgow. I've been teaching media for about 9 years now. And as Kerry says, we have all been party to teaching media under these COVID restrictions for the past year. I've been delivering BGE media, National 4, National 5 and higher over the course of the last year.
Fabulous. And then we have Sam.
Hello. I'm Sam DeSmith and I teach media and English in Bannerman High School in Glasgow's East End, one of the bigger comps in Glasgow. I've been teaching media in various guises for many years, but within the secondary system, I've been doing so for the last 8 years-ish. And like many teachers, I kind of come to this from the route of starting out as an English practitioner, teaching film and TV, and then getting lost down the rabbit hole. I'm also very heavily entrenched within the SQA. I'm principal verifier of media, and I have many fingers in many pies. I was once described as the SQA's media octopus.
I genuinely thought, Sam, that you were going to say heavily entrenched in the DC universe, which I was like, please let's not get into that so quickly. And then finally we have Lisa. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm Lisa Welsh. I teach at Denny High School. I'm an English and media teacher. I'm like 5 minutes up the road from Larbert. I've only been there 3 years, but I've been teaching media for 10 years. I started like out in Dundee and kind of established like just a great network of media teachers there, but unfortunately left because we had great links with like DCA and stuff. But now we're just trying to get these kids to watch films and maybe engage. So it's definitely been an experience this past year, but still loving it.
Great. So an experience is definitely one way to describe this past year, I think. So we all know that COVID has forced teachers to rethink how they interpret and deliver film education outside of the traditional classroom settings. And we're going to get into some of those things that we've been doing in a second. But first, let's rewind the clock. Let's take it right back to the 24th of March, 2020, around this time last year, first day of lockdown. Speaking as a film educator, what did you see then as the sort of main challenges facing the teaching of film in this environment? And Sam, we'll come to you first for some thoughts on that.
I think above all, my major concerns were about access. I mean, we're so used to being able to stick on a DVD and discuss it at length. Suddenly we're presented with this very real prospect of young people not being able to access what we're trying to teach them and get them to engage with. And and then as you build on from that, you've got these very real concerns about equity. You're having to start to think in terms of surveys to fairly discreetly tease out of young people what they have access to in terms of platforms, in terms of wider access, so that it's still a level playing field, so that we are still teaching to everyone in the way that we would ordinarily without thinking about it. It's strange because there've been some things that when it started to put in place, and you get kind of little light bulb moments. The one for me was about 3 years ago with my higher class, and I went to say, right, just take this home with you, this DVD. She's like, I've missed it. They'd had issues at home. Like, we'll take the DVD home, just go watch it. And they went, on what? And it's like we're having to catch up with the technology and with young people and how they engage with and how they consume media. And that really accelerated during lockdown, sort of thinking about how are we going to ensure that young people really are going to be able to access the media that we want to teach and the breadth and range of it in a way that works for everyone. So that was the big worry for me.
Yeah, I definitely hear you. I've had that instance as well with here's the DVD, and they're just looking at you like, and what do you want me to do with that? And you're like, oh yes, okay. Lisa, what were your sort of thoughts at that time as to what the main challenges were going to be?
I was exactly the same as Sam, that you kind of just thought, oh, everybody will have Netflix or whatever, and we can watch that. But it just made you kind of go back and say, right, what have we all got access to? Like, it blew the kids' minds that they had like free access to BBC and Channel 4. In actual fact, sometimes that was like, it was quite good because they kind of like, they were maybe then exposed to something else, but it was definitely just like us all trying to get the same thing at the same time and then just getting them to engage with it. And even I had been teaching horror because for our National 4s like last year, because they were going to be going into a National 5 class, and that's the kind of horror genres, but they just like they get taught it for National 5. And I thought I want to like go right back to the beginning, try and get them to watch like Psycho, and it was one classic like Hitchcock, and I thought, go and just one of you watch it, and one person did, and it was amazing because it was on BBC, they could access it, and just giving them that, like, although it's been really difficult, giving them that breadth, I felt like they could get access to a bigger, like, wider range of films that maybe they wouldn't have seen, or they would have, like, they wouldn't have maybe even looked at. But definitely was straight away, you were just like, how am I going to get like whatever 20 kids, all like they can't all just, I can't assume they've got Netflix or Amazon, or even that they've got a device on their own that they can watch it. Like, it was even like, if the Netflix is only in the one TV in the living room, they can't exactly expect them to be able to like watch Black Klansman like 15 times because that's what they're studying for their exam. So yeah, it was equity. That was a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you find that, this idea of things like iPlayer and Film 4 having a more kind of curated selection made it easier maybe for the kids to navigate what was quality and what was not, versus like the whole Netflix thing of like, there's hundreds and hundreds of stuff?
I would say so. I think especially like I suppose it was towards the latter part of the year, the kind of Black Lives Matter, which was brilliant for me, was that kind of black cinema was like amazing, because I'd been teaching I was teaching Black Klansmen, and so that I was able to like point them in that direction. But it's like they're just not as overwhelmed, I suppose. It's that kind of, it's not quite, they can just look at the films and how long they're on for and stuff. So it is quite, I found that much easier. Yeah, but you're right.
Kids having analysis of choice, there's too much, and because it's so well organized, particularly iPlayer. But the other nice thing, which was an unexpected bonus, I think, of teaching using iPlayer and Channel 4, because it was an interesting, different way of teaching institutions.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't necessarily occur, and because it's a thing that kids can sometimes really struggle with, to get them thinking about, well, what is the point of public service broadcasting? And to actually engage with that as a different way of learning about what public service broadcasting is, in a way that's not as dry necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they were actually living, like potentially having to use public service broadcasting and then looking at the impact it has on a societal level for access to film. Yeah. Rather than just explaining that, well, in this case, that would happen in that. What about you, Kirsty? What were your sort of challenges that you had thought about?
I think every media teacher, as soon as we were told we were going to be in the classroom, had that same knee jerk of, how am I going to get content to the kids? Because you're so aware of your class in front of you, and they don't all have access to everything. So that was a big one. And obviously, like Sam and Lisa said, went through the same process of who's got access to what, and it ended up, again, like they said, being very focused on iPlayer and more for access, because they could all get it, and it meant that it was much fairer. But the other thing that really concerned me sort of right from the get-go is media is such a collaborative subject, and knowing that the kids weren't going to be in the same space together for, well, last year I think we all thought it was maybe going to be a month and everything was going to be fine, but knowing that you were going to have to try and keep the kids collaborating and working together was something else that was kind of something to overcome, because in a media classroom, you want your kids to be working in groups on their film or supporting each other in kind of understanding quite complex concepts for the age that your kids are, and sort of taking away that support and just being remote and on video call. And I think we've all experienced the tumbleweed moment of kids don't want to ask questions to clarify understanding, and kids are quite reticent online to put their camera on or raise their hand. I think sort of trying to go over that hurdle was quite difficult. So I investigated, I used breakout rooms on Teams quite a lot, and felt that once I put them in wee groups and I wasn't always there, they were much more open to talking to each other, especially my higher class, which was great. So when we went into lockdown in January there, we've been doing quite a lot of revision, and using that has been really useful, and I can drop in and out, but the chat is much more naturally occurring than when they're all online, because I think they do find it quite overwhelming. So not only are you trying to go over the fact that they can't all get access to the same thing to watch, but that whole support network for them has dropped out, which I find really challenging. But iPlayer has been an absolute lifesaver. Like Sam was saying, part of my higher course this year, I used Louis Theroux documentary, and teaching that idea of public service broadcasting is always quite challenging, but using it in the framework of have a look at what else is on iPlayer, what does that tell us, where does Louis Theroux sit within that, it actually made them kind of understand that with much more clarity, which was fantastic. It was really good.
I really like the fact that I've asked you for the challenges and you've all come up with actual things that came out that were good. So maybe let's kind of keep on that train of thought and thinking about the theory side of teaching film, teaching key concepts, teaching and analysis skills. Obviously, the way we've been able to teach that has changed. Every teacher on this call knows that. Are there any things that you've done while teaching film via remote learning that you think maybe you might keep when we move back to a classroom environment? Lisa, I want to come to you first on that.
Yeah, like me and Kerry work quite closely together, and I was a real cynic of this whole like technology and working online and just like getting everybody like how would you go. I just couldn't see it ever working. But I've noticed like I've got like with National 4 or just kids who are maybe just finding it more difficult, because I think we forget how difficult media is. You're asking them to like really think about, be quite objective when they're like 15, 16. That's actually quite hard. And getting them to just do like things that were really straightforward where they weren't just like thrown in. So like Microsoft Forms has become like my best pal. Microsoft Forms, Microsoft Sway, because like you could put in all the things, like see all that kind of chat you would have with kids, especially in Sway, you can add that and you're like, and it's just easier for them to access. But Microsoft Forms for kids who maybe were finding it difficult, were a wee bit poorer, it just was much easier. And also they engaged, because I think like we'll probably not actually acknowledge the fact that like getting kids to work was quite difficult, and it's still quite difficult. And getting them to like upload like work or whatever else was impossible. But Microsoft Forms, they seem to like just love that. And to be fair, I have used it with Hire, and it seems like it's a much more manageable process for them, because it's just like as Kirsty said, like I teach media because of the chat between the kids, like the kind of discussion that you get about film and like the society and all that kind of stuff. That's why like I love it, because the kids can kind of have an opinion that isn't like rooted in all this kind of like the canon of like English literature. And that's like my favourite, and it's like you do miss that. So like just having smaller like things that wasn't quite as intimidating as going like right, their analysis of this. Definitely Microsoft Forms and Microsoft Sway will be staying with me like as I go into back into school, definitely. But yeah, because it was hard. It was hard just to get them to do some work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've actually had in the chat a comment from Joanna from Greece, who says that in Greece they hadn't been familiar really with online solutions until the pandemic hit, so they thought that they might not be able to continue with the programme, but as soon as they found that things, you know, the different things that they could use, things were becoming a bit more optimistic. And I think that's been the story in Scotland as well. I don't know what you think about that, Kirsty, tools that you've found useful during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so, and I think obviously we were all we'd been using digital tools, and Sam and I both teach in Glasgow, and we've just had a refresh. I think you're going through it in Falkirk, that we're getting iPads and young people are getting iPads too. So we were quite lucky in that respect, that we knew going into lockdown that kids would have access to at least one piece of the same technology, so they would all have access to Teams and things that we were sharing work on. But I think when it kind of kicked off, it was quite overwhelming, wasn't it? But I think in terms of what I'm going to take back to the classroom theory teaching, it's forced me to kind of consider how I deliver my theory lessons. I think when you're in the classroom, it gives you a lot more flexibility. If kids don't understand what they're doing and for understanding because you're online, you just feel that you might not be getting that give and take that you get in the classroom. You can't assume that the kids know what you're talking about. So it kind of forced me to be a bit more organised and sort of think, right, what might they not understand about institutions, say, or narrative, and how can I make that much clearer? So I think I'm going to try and streamline how I'm teaching sort of key concepts, rather than them being as airy-fairy as they might have been in the past in the classroom, where I could speak to the kids and get a bit more give and take.
Yeah, I think as well, when you're teaching particularly higher, which just for anyone on the call who's not from Scotland, higher level is the level you teach probably with your last year of school. So your kind of 16, 17-year-olds, it's the highest level of qualification that they can do for media and film studies in Scotland. So you really are dealing with some really complex and in-depth theory. And I think sometimes the temptation can be to move towards more of that chalk and talk lecture style. Perhaps we've found out more about ways to deliver that theory through digital tools that perhaps maybe open it up a little bit more, it sounds like.
That's a really good point about the danger of lecturing. So one of the things that I found I use, which I wouldn't really have used before, I haven't really used in the past, is I was drawing more on sort of YouTube videos, kind of like in Crash Course, that kind of thing, introductory theory, alongside things like the Inside Cinema series back on BBC again. But what was really interesting as a bit of feedback from that was because we'd used that, higher candidates who then went into media courses found that because we'd done it that way, they had a better understanding when they hit it at first year undergraduate level, because things had not been explained in the way that they were usually being explained to them. And so it was quite interesting. And you know, it is really, really unimaginably difficult, the thing that we've all been through, but by actually being willing, I guess, to let somebody else explain the concepts and let somebody else almost teach, not for you, but to just, it's just a different spin on things. And I think being willing to kind of accept that and embrace that is always really valuable, which is kind of what these conversations are like. I mean, we're very lucky. I mean, we are, in Scotland generally, we're quite a close-knit group of media teachers that is very accepting. I mean, Kirsty, Lisa, and I, we talk all the time. We just chat. But it is important to remember that not everyone has that facility. And although we're quite kind of welcoming, people are either isolated or they can be quite sort of feel quite precious because they're just teaching the subject themselves. And so having, and because of the nature of the subject, and because you often are on your own, you do feel very kind of possessive about it, I guess. And so a big step for me is almost being able to say, no, it's okay to kind of let other people explain these concepts sometimes. I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Is there anything else, Sam, while we're just with you, that you would keep from the theory side of things that you've learned via remote learning?
It's not exactly a theory. It's a slightly different thing, but it's a thing that I'm definitely going to keep. And it is back to the YouTube thing, and it's sort of thinking about using different platforms and using different forms. And something that I've definitely embraced more this year is short film. And Vimeo as a platform has been a real eye-opener, really helpful, and something that kids just don't know about, and yet they find they can access really quite readily. And for short film, and thinking kind of in different ways of getting them to engage, and thinking about attention spans, and like Lisa was saying as well, that thing of, you cannot say, yeah, just sit in your front room and watch this film 15 times, because, you know, real life. Thinking about different forms of media, different forms of film, so in particular short film, and different ways, and then using that to inform things like the assignment process, so our project for higher media in particular, but generally in terms of like how we think about film. And that's opened up some really interesting discussions then with young people. I mean, one of the things that really kind of struck me, and this came out of a conversation with a pupil who is Korean, and because obviously sort of South Korea has been very much kind of at the forefront of 5G development, a lot of kind of them are there's been a lot of very used to watching TV on smartphones, which I know we now kind of take for granted, but the idea of programs being optimized for that format and short films being optimized for those formats, and that raises a whole other kind of set of questions and interesting kind of discussion to have. And that's in turn then opened up more discussion possibilities when we've maybe struggled sometimes to have discussion freely and kind of in the way that we would in a classroom environment.
Yeah, I would definitely like to hear from people on the call, you know, in the chat, if short film has been something that has kind of come to the fore where you are, because I feel that here, certainly for me, short film, something that I didn't really use that much before. I used that a little bit in the younger age groups, the sort of 11 to 14 age bracket, just because of the way that we teach at that level. But I've certainly definitely seen more short films, been exposed to more short films, and I've definitely seen more of a role for them in film education at that higher level. I don't know if Kirsty and Lisa, you would agree with that, or?
I think definitely. So, and I think it's more sorry, Lisa, I think it's more manageable, isn't it? You know, it's much more straightforward for kids to get access to Vimeo or YouTube, and they can watch that on a smaller device. You know, you wouldn't be expecting them to watch an entire film like your Black Klansman, Lisa, 15 times on their iPhone, but you can ask them to watch a short film and they all have access to that. And you know, yourself in the classroom, if most of your kids have got a smartphone, they have access to that tech, even if the school hasn't given it to them. Like, we've got the iPads as well. But
I think the other thing on terms of the short film thing is that, like, it actually makes a lot of sense to go to short film, because short film's more of the form that we are kind of getting them to look towards making in the project. But yet when we do the theory side, so many of us tend to go straight for a feature length, like, you know, Hollywood film, or you know, a film that comes from an institution that has got a big budget and a lot of money behind it and a lot of power behind it. So it maybe makes more sense in a lot of ways. Just a little comment from the chat. Richard Patterson, just to get a little consensus on this here, has said that he appreciates that very good point about the value of public service broadcasting and free access. And I would like to echo his sort of suggestion that if anyone from BFI is on this call, how about making BFI Player available to schools in the same way that Screen Online is? What do we think about that, panel?
Yes, 100%. Please give us BFI for free. I would love it. Like, the resources are amazing. Like, I've got a couple of the books and used them extensively when I first started teaching media. I would love to have access to BFI. I think just for that, like, because it's just getting that kind of maybe less well known, a bit more kind of the like a broader range of like film for them. It's just would be brilliant. I love showing kids like it's that if you're teaching a genre and you can go right back to something like the kind of original like of that genre, the most famous of that genre. Like, I love it. So yeah, I'd love, please give us access to BFI. Someday.
You've started a movement. We're all behind you. We'll join you in the quest for BFI to be free. So we've got another comment from Joanna again. She says, I think the fact that we are now doing a lot more than what we would have done without the pandemic, although we are terribly missing the closeness of the kids, but life is strange, as everyone knows. So just talking about that closeness and proximity with the young people, we'll move on to talking a little bit about practical filmmaking. So obviously social distancing and various restrictions being in place, it meant that practical filmmaking became extremely challenging. How did you manage to keep the practical side of film education alive during lockdown? And we'll go to Kirsty first for this one, if that's okay.
We had, well, my higher class make a film for their project, and we had already kind of started down the road of practical filmmaking and looking into how they could make something effective, but maybe only have single people in frames or like single shots. And they were kind of encouraged when they were researching to try and keep their kind of cast to a minimum, which you would tend to encourage anyway, you know, because kids have grandiose ideas and go off and want to have all of their pals join in and the pieces. So because we'd kind of planned that in terms of their kind of planning was quite minimal and their casting was quite small, when we went back into lockdown in January, quite a lot of my higher guys had filmed quite a lot anyway. So when they were having to film in their house or just themselves, they didn't come up across as many challenges as I thought they would. And what was quite nice sort of remotely was we were doing some sort of check-ins with them at certain points, so we kind of shared bits that they maybe hadn't edited and got some feedback from the rest of the class about how it was working and how it looked, and did it have the meaning that they hoped it did before they started to kind of edit it into their whole short film, which was quite nice. So they were kind of getting feedback from their class as we were doing that. But I started some filmmaking with my third year in the past month and a half, because we hadn't done anything at all. So I've had them since August and they've not done any media before, so we've been kind of embedding all the sort of theory up until this point, and that's been quite interesting, in that they were all encouraged to go and find a sequence from any film that they really like, and then we picked it apart, and then they were to make a film with 5 of those shots in it, but they were to limit it to, they were only allowed to use cuddly toys or action figures, like no family members, no anything. So it was to really get them to think quite creatively about making a film with real limitations on them, just in case next year they still do have to make a film with real limitations on them. And that's worked quite well. We've had some quite good stuff out of that so far, and they've all found the challenge quite enjoyable. I think they found it good fun to actually use, you know, different props and different things to use as characters, rather than using people that can actually speak and their family members open, you know.
Yeah, I think I've found the same. Like, I'm very similar to you, Kirsty. My higher classes normally have already had enough filmmaking input in the lower school that when it comes to project or assignment time, they're sent off to do it. So the restrictions didn't actually have a huge effect on them. And actually, I was very lucky that all my films were already made by the time we went into lockdown. So I was like extra lucky. But when it came to teaching the School of Media, we've done something very similar to you, where we've broken things down into very small tasks that focus on kind of bringing the theory to life. So we did a whole section on like slow motion and using slow motion shots to show certain types of things. And I think actually that's quite useful, because they're getting a little bit more of an in-depth look in a way at specific elements of filmmaking, rather than, like you're saying, the first thing they do when they're in a group is potentially they go, okay, well, I'm going to be the actor and I'm going to be the cameraman, and they don't focus in on the craft maybe in a group scenario. So do you think when they come back, they're going to be, do you anticipate that the actual quality of the films, because they've spent that time doing that, might be a little bit higher?
I hope so. Especially with the third, obviously the higher guys, they're done and dusted now, but especially with the third year who are coming back to go into National 5 next year, we usually do storyboarding for National 5, but because we've had this extra time with them really focusing, like you were saying, Kerry, on the craft of filmmaking, I'm quite tempted to let them make films for Nat 5 this year, because I feel that they've got a bit more sort of embedded skill that they could start to use quite quickly, rather than, you all know yourself, trying to make time to embed those skills when you're trying to teach towards an exam, certainly if you're doing a national with a class. So I think it'll be quite interesting to see if they feel up to that, because they've had that extra time.
Like what happens there. We'll go to Sam. Sam, how have you kept filmmaking alive during lockdown?
Well, I'm gonna cheat. So I've also used this, he said, yeah, I'm rolling up the sleeves and everything, actually to embrace some quite old school practical activities about interfacing print and film. So it was like, well, let's not just think about filmmaking, but let's think about other things around it. So designing lockdown film festivals, that's been fun. Now I know that's not strictly speaking an answer to the question. But just thinking about the range of media film activities that we can do, because I absolutely agree about sort of getting kids thinking about craft, and we've been very lucky, for example, as we've mentioned, in Glasgow, because we've had iPads, so kids have had access to that, and kids using smartphone filmmaking, but just thinking about other things that we've been up to, going back to thinking about something, and going back to what we were saying earlier about kind of curated content. Getting kids thinking about, right, well, how would you, here is literally, you can design a film festival from all of these films that are online and freely available. And so convince us to come to your lockdown film festival, and then using that to look at the print skills and look at, you know, how they would sort of think about the marketing of that film and sort of bringing it all together. So thinking about the big picture again, because and I know this is a film education conversation, but it's just thinking about the kind of the holistic, you know, the whole kind of multimodal approach to media education. You know, thinking about, well, how can we bring these things in together and do a range of practical activities, and also because you know, some kind, you know, we do have a situation where some kids are frustrated by the limitations that they were under during lockdown, and sort of like, well, let's think in a completely different way. Let's embrace film, but do it in a different way, and share their passion for film and things that they've discovered. So, you know, it was really interesting because so I had a group, my higher, or it was actually, I did it as a practical activity for kids who wanted to do the hire, who were jumping into it as a crash hire. So kids who had not done media before, who wanted to come in to do it as 6th year. So they're like, right, convince me. What do you love? They were going to get to do it anyway, but it was like, well, tell me your passion, and tell me why you love film, but don't just tell me, tell everyone, sell me it. And, you know, you've got access to this content. And going back to those print skills as well, and, you know, how we combine those things to produce something interesting, practical, and hands-on for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the idea that, you know, we do, when we think about practical activities, we think about filmmaking, but you're right, there is so much more around the business of film that we can get young people engaged with and get young people thinking about, that add to that whole understanding of what film is, its place in society, the power of film, and all that sort of stuff. That sounds really, really interesting. I would quite like to see some of the film festival lineups, actually, Sam. Lisa, what about you? How have you kept the practical side alive?
It's been same as everybody else. It's like quite difficult because you're just like the restrictions were like quite severe. But there was something about, because usually when kids like in previous years when they come up against problems with their filming, it usually kind of stunts them, and they kind of like, they maybe like panic. Whereas this time, because I felt like there was like major Hollywood movies had been like shut down, like there was major, like, do you know what I mean, nobody's seen James Bond, like they understood that, like, all right, this isn't just because like Miss Welsh is trying to like wreck our lives. This is like a real thing, and it's like we're going to have to like try and actually overcome these problems. And I actually think it made them more creative. It made them like problem solve much more on their own, because I wasn't there to even like help them. I think it's just made for much more interesting films because they weren't all done in the school on their school uniforms. And I think it's just made them think a wee bit more, just be maybe a wee bit more confident. So I think like that's also what I love about teaching media, is that kind of keeping the practical filmmaking, is to give them ownership of it. And like the more ownership they have and the less interference from me, I think the kind of more risk they will take. So in some ways, I think like lockdown actually did them like, to keep practical filmmaking alive. It did do them like I said, it was beneficial, because they did have to kind of go, wait, now like I can't really go anywhere but like the village I live in. So where is it scary? Where is it like, where could I film that? How am I going to like rope my dad into doing this? Like there's been so many, like you're clearly there's a parent in it and you're like, they have not wanted to do this. But just like I've just been really impressed. Like I think the kids kind of surprised me really. It wasn't actually me keeping it alive. I think it was more them. But it definitely helped that loads of like major productions were shut down. I think they kind of they understood that actually they're going to have to solve these problems. There's much less resistance to saying, and previous years when they're making stuff like, but I don't want to do that, there's nothing for me to do. Whereas this time it was like, oh, you're in your house, so
Yeah.
you've not got a knacking teacher, you've not got anything. They were just kind of getting on with it. So I've really like, not so much, I've not done really much with the BGE, but definitely like my senior classes, like the older kids. It was great, really enjoyed it.
One thing that I kind of hope, just from hearing you say that, and it's totally rung true to me, one thing I hope is that like maybe some of us as film educators have realised that actually the kids filming outside of the classroom is so much better than in the classroom. There's nothing more say than when you watch a kid's film and you're like, oh, so is that and they're like, oh, that's the policeman. I just got him to take his school blazer off so that you could tell. And you're like, all right. And you know, because they've actually got access to more stuff than we can give them. In school, everybody's film ends up looking kind of the same.
Because like in Scotland, we've all got the same, like that same school, haven't we? Like that same design school, and everybody's like corridors look the same. The previous school I was in, it looked like something like, I don't know, it did look like something a horror film. So they had all these like, they had a basement and like a tower and it's like really old fashioned parts of the school. And it was amazing. But like since I've like been at Denny, it's like, oh, that just looks like and it's a shame because you think they try to be like creative, but actually being outside and like kind of having to rope in families and houses and whatever else has just been brilliant, really.
And it's amazing. It's amazing when you let them go and do that, what they do. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a kid who climbed a literal mountain to get an extreme long shot of his dad, who was playing his main character, like walking along this mountain path. And I was like, so did you use a drone for that? He was like, no, I made my dad sit and eat a banana so I could like run up the hill for half an hour to get this shot. And you're like, that would never have happened if we'd filmed these films. So I definitely, so we'll move on then just to the last question before we go into the Q&A portion. And this is sort of thinking more widely about film during a pandemic. So we saw lots of young people and all kinds of people actually turn to the arts, including film, to help them get through a difficult time. Why do you think film is so powerful as a medium for young people? And what do you think about the place of film within education post-pandemic? And we'll come to Sam first for some thoughts on that.
I really, really have to try hard not to soapbox it. But before I do, I really should apologize. Like, you'd think as a film educator, I could set up my lighting a bit better, wouldn't you?
Well, we didn't want to say Sam, but
the thing that we have kids now who are spending a minimum of 8 to 9 hours engaging with media every single day, and yet we are not teaching at every step of the way. It's just insane. It is fundamental. It is literacy. We should be teaching this all the way through, from primary through all the way through secondary. It is fundamental. Now, yes, we've got an agenda here, all of us, but you know, the language of film is so fundamental. My background before I was a teacher was linguistics and neurolinguistics, okay? And that's what is kind of like at the core of actually everything that I'm interested in. is like how we break things down and how we interpret the world around us and how we communicate that. And although that's not necessarily, when you phrase it like that, maybe it is, but it might not necessarily be obvious that that's a path into media education, but it's about deconstructing the world around you and communicating your understanding of that. And this is their language, it's their grammar, it's their syntax in a very real way. You know, it's far more meaningful and far more immediate than the analysis of poetry. And I say that as someone who's passionate about the teaching and of poetry in particular. So it's absolutely fundamental. It is vital. It speaks to them in ways that they don't realize, you know, and it's so universal. And it is the fact that it crosses culture, it crosses language, but it enables us to broaden our perspective on culture and societies, and it allows us to understand in a way that we never thought imaginable. And in a time when we are locked down, when we are stuck, there is no better way to see and engage and be part of the world as a whole.
Nice. That was beautiful. You actually even had a wee cameo from Kirsty's ice cream van, I think.
I know, really. Sorry, that was so nice.
A wee backing track for you there. Yeah, there was lots of nodding there. Lisa, you were nodding along. What are your sort of thoughts on?
I'm exactly like the same as Sam. I think, like, for me, media has always been a kind of equaliser, because whatever kid's been told, oh, you're not very good at English, or you're not very good, you're not very academic, they can come into media, and because they think it's like, oh, I'm watching a film, they'll share much more. I think it gives them confidence to analyse, to share opinions, to be objective, like to kind of look at themselves and go, well, like, why do I think like that? And Sam's totally right. These kids are like bombarded with messages they don't even understand, and trying to, if I can give them like the skills to be able to recognise that and go, right, who's actually behind this? What's the agenda? And I might be the only like media teacher in the world who actually like really enjoys teaching the business side of it, because I think like you need to know like who's like paying for this, like this is why you're getting this message, like what is going on here. Also, like all these people who are living like, I don't know, pride stuff or like Black Lives Matter, it's because there's money in it for them. Like, let's like be cynical here. And they do get quite they're like, no, Miss Welsh, it can't be that bad. And I'm like, obviously they're trying to do good, but also like there's money to be made. And so I get really like, it's ridiculous. But I think that getting them to really understand like the larger agenda, and especially in this past year, I feel like, I don't know about anybody else, but for years I felt like kids didn't really watch anything. They weren't engaged with the news, they weren't engaged, like they just felt like very insular. And this past year, I think like it's the first time like I've taught a film where they weren't like pushing back against, if I was talking about feminism or like institutionalized racism or like transphobia, like they weren't pushing back against it, because in the past year they had been able to do nothing but sit and kind of like, especially what's happened in the past year, do you know what I mean? Like just not even just the pandemic, but like just like politics wise, even in our own like just mad. And I felt like they're actually kind of switched on. So I just think it just gives them such a like an access to the world and like and what people are saying and doing and how they're manipulated by that. And you kind of just want them to be critical thinkers. And I think media in a way, and I'm an English teacher at heart, but like media in a way does that much more effectively, because as Sam says, that is their language, that is what they're bombarded with every day. As much as I'd love them to be reading like, I don't know, Toni Morrison or whatever, or like Shakespeare, they're not doing that. So, but they are like being bombarded with images on TikTok, or they are being bombarded like on Netflix. So it's like, what is this and why is it happening? So yeah, like I love it. So I think, and especially nowadays for these kids, they grow up very different to me, and I think they need that experience so they can navigate the rest of their life really.
Like tools, I guess, for navigating society that they live in, and film study does help to kind of give you that tool, that toolkit. What about you, Kirsty? What do you think about the place of film education post-pandemic?
I don't know if there's anything I can say that Sam and Lisa haven't already said so eloquently, but I think this idea that it's an equaliser, you know, you can have kids in media who you've taught them in English and media too, you know, and they've struggled in English, and try to get them to write anything has been so challenging, and you say, well, go film it, tell me your story, but do it through film, and they realise that actually they have a voice and they have something to say, and they can actually do that really effectively. I think it's really powerful when they have that realisation that even if their storyboard doesn't look all that good and their script's a bit scrappy, when they actually go out and actively make the content and it turns into something that says something and gets their point of view across, I think they realise that they have something important to say and folk are going to listen to them, rather than being forced to write and it not really making sense and it being picked apart by the teacher. Do you know, I think media's a bit more subjective. What did you mean there? Why did you mean that? Why does it look that way? Do you know, and they can explain all their thinking behind it.
Yeah, there's also on that note, the idea of that teaching literature, which we all four of us do as well, you know, that's quite canonized. There's already very, you know, stringent ideas that have been set in stone for a very long time about what this means or what that means. Film's so current that, you know, those things haven't necessarily been put into the annals of, you know, textbooks and analysis books and all the rest of it. So it is still quite open for them to explore their own kind of reactions to it and take from it what they want to take from it as well.
Kerry, I had a class and we'd been teaching about the Avengers, and so I was teaching them about props like narrative theory, like the roles of prop. And this one kid got up, and he was only in second year, wasn't he like a big chatter, like a big contributor to the classroom, and he argued that Thanos was the hero and Iron Man was actually the villain. That was like, and I remember, and the whole class just sat and looked at him like, what? Like, and then I was like, actually, like, can we like think about this, please? Like, how is like Thanos why is Thanos like the hero? And there was that kind of like, as an English teacher, you're always, it sounds terrible, but you feel like you're kind of trying to correct them and you're always guiding them in analysis. Whereas kids can come up with some like mad stuff or just brilliant things, and you're like, I've never thought about it like that. And he was absolutely convinced Iron Man was the villain, Thanos was the hero, and I was like, that's cool, that's fine. You could justify it.
Sam's dying to say something.
It's really empowering. They are the expert. And I think as educators, sometimes we are reluctant to release that power. Or very superpowered again. We're reluctant to kind of let go sometimes, and it's so empowering for young people to, and they are the experts, and they can choose the text that they are passionate about and say that, and they can. It's that whole thing of, it's almost, I mean, and it is not a million miles away from talking about reader response theory. You know, well, if you think this is correct, your analysis is right, just justify it to me. But it's so much more immediate to them, and they can be that expert, and they can teach us, and that's. I love it. I think it's absolutely is when you get a kid who constructs something and you just go, oh. Now, to take a similar Marvel Universe example, actually, that came up. One of my young people who's quite, she's quirky, shall we say. We were looking at the trailer for Civil War because we were trying to think about, well, what does it say about American society in 2016, that it's at the Super Bowl, and that this is the backdrop of American election. And she said, well, Bucky's standing with a gun behind Captain America's shield because it's the Second Amendment. I was like, oh, I hadn't even noticed that. And then she went on. And then, of course, Rhodey's just like down from a high angle. So, you know, basically they're fighting over Obama's legacy.
That's amazing.
Oh, I love them. It's so good.
That's the moments that just make it all. That's why you're like, yes, that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So we're at 5:20 at the moment. We would like to open this up to Q&A if there is anybody who would like to ask anything or get any thoughts from the panel. But I know, Joanna, if you're still on the call, you've been quite active in the chat. I wondered if you wanted to maybe pop your camera on, pop your microphone on, tell us a little bit about the short film that you've posted in the chat. Give her a wee second and see if she appears.
Yes, hello from Athens, Greece. This short film is a digital film, actually, animation. One of my students took part in the team, and it was made within the Olympia Festival for children and young people. One of the best initiatives in Greece as far as film literacy is concerned. And well, it was a good try, I think, taken into account the situation we're experiencing.
Yeah, I would watch it. I think, can I just ask you a little question, Joanna, if you don't mind? You've obviously put in there about, you know, Greek director and Grey's Poor Things and stuff. In Scotland, we tend to go a little bit more Hollywood a lot of the time with the film choices that we make, and quite American.
Okay.
How important is Greek film within the Greek curriculum?
Within the Greek curriculum in schools, you think? We don't have so many films for children, high school students or primary school students. It's been one of my concerns because I would really like to show my students a Greek film, but I can't find many suitable films, at least from the present. There may be some attempts from a very long time ago, which I think won't interest students today. Well,
yeah, I can see Kirsty's nodding there. Do you have a similar experience of Scottish film, Kirsty?
It's finding stuff that they're going to engage with, and I think I've found over lockdown, like we were saying about accessing stuff on iPlayer and exposing young people to content that maybe I wouldn't have picked ordinarily. Do you know, you said, Kerry, that we tend to err towards the Hollywood blockbuster, and I'm certainly guilty of that at higher and at Nat 5. And I think lockdown has kind of forced us to be a bit more open to what we're sharing with the young people, and I'm definitely going to try and embed more breadth rather than just here's some Hollywood.
Yeah, just here's the latest thing that
Yeah.
There's a Scottish film we're about to share with students next month, The Water Horse.
Oh, is that one of the Kelpies?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It's,
oh, that's really interesting.
It's one of the explanations given how the Loch Ness Monster started.
Oh, you need to tell us how you get on with that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, okay.
One of these is showing a Scottish film. That's really cool. We'll definitely have a look at the film that your young people have made. That looks fabulous. And this Olympia Festival sounds really, really good. We've also had a little tip off, I guess, from Amanda, who said that Mubi, M-U-B-I, offers free accounts to teachers and students, although they may not necessarily be suitable for all school ages, because she teaches vocational film and further education, but it's been really useful for her. So any secondary teachers maybe teaching upper secondary or senior secondary, that might be something to look at. And then a question from Vary. Do you feel that COVID has encouraged film and media teachers to form tighter networks of support? Have you / they maybe been encouraged or forced to connect with each other more? Has anyone felt that they've established connections out with their usual circle? That's a great question.
I think we're quite well established, even just like an hour before, but also like there's a kind of larger group of us, and we've been quite well established for years. I think that's just through teaching media on our own, and then you kind of bring in, it's like right across Scotland. So I don't know if I've reached out more to like other people, but definitely I think it's made us maybe rely more on like sharing resources and all that kind of thing. But we were always like, I think even before the pandemic, we were pretty supportive and tight and like sharing stuff and things like that. But
I think it's partly because the nature of the subject is you tend to be the sole practitioner. But I think actually genuinely and importantly, from a mental health perspective, the reliance on one another has been invaluable. I mean, and we have talked about this as a group, the fact that as we're there for one another, and I think that in a way that, because for example, I mean, just not that as an English department you aren't necessarily, but that is an English department, a large rambling things, and tends to be the case. Whereas because you're used to, as a media teacher, often being in isolation, you are looking for other people, and so when you have those networks, they have been reinforced over lockdown.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
Yeah, I do think that there could be But the question is, who would do this? There could be a more sort of formal, if you like, forum, but not a formal forum. That made no sense. Like an informal, formal forum where people who don't know anyone would be able to get in touch and connect with others. And certainly I can say for myself, if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me to talk media stuff, just find me on Twitter, find my email address, and I'll be happy to speak to anyone. I can see Sam's nodding there, and so is Lisa. So if you are feeling like you're doing this all by yourself, we've all been there, so just drop a line. And we'll be more than happy to help. A question from Callum. When it came to practically filming and dealing with COVID restrictions, was there any consideration to use animation as a way to create film?
I've got a story about this. I've got a sort of story about this because one of my pupils tried to do this. It was quite interesting. It's not quite the same thing, but it's well, actually, one of my National 5 kids has tried to do it using animation. It's been really interesting, and he's actually used Lego to make a film, to do it as a Lego animation for his his assignment, really successfully actually, and it's been great fun. But one of my higher class tried to do something, and I'll be absolutely upfront, it didn't really work, but it was a brilliant idea, which was he decided he wanted to he scripted a fight sequence with his bear with me. So what he did was he live recorded himself playing a VR fight game to get the POV shots.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work because he didn't actually have control over the camera angles in the way that he wanted to. But as an experiment, I'm just like, I love the way you're thinking. It's like just trying to use technology in totally different ways. So really, I guess to answer Callum's question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, why not use animation?
I think also it depends on like the kid's expertise, because I had a kid as well who used, I have no idea how it works, but that like the kind of virtual reality, like, I don't know, shooting game, it was like killing folk, the idea. And actually, like, in the end, like, because he's been able to add like bits and pieces to it on his own, he's obviously much more like technology minded than I am, but I think if a kid knows what they're doing, then it's great. But I think teaching it, I'm always a wee bit wary because it's not like my level, it's not like my kind of expertise, or and it's just access to technology. So it's like access to like the equipment to be able to do it. But yeah, I'd love to see more kids do it.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. Like, I do use a lot of animation in my junior classes, but that has come from me being a bit of a geek about it and like learning how to do things myself. So buying loads of plasticine and trying out different apps and using different stop motion things and like looking at various different programs that use animation. And what I teach for animation is within my sort of comfort zone of what I know about animation, but I've had to do a lot of my own learning about animation and how to do it before I've then been able to go and teach young people kind of how to access that. But definitely used it. And we've got probably time for just one more question. It's coming right up on past, so we'll just ask this and then we'll pop off. But thinking about TikTok, arguably the most popular social media platform in the last year, have you seen any influence of the TikTok effect in your classes in terms of more interest in experimenting perhaps with moving image? While not a filmmaking medium, I have seen some very clever examples of transitions or telling short narratives in under a minute, and that's from Catherine.
I think so many kids are using TikTok. Do you know, it's so ubiquitous in the classroom. They all know it. They all are familiar with what's going on. One of my higher candidates has made a TikTok horror this year for their assignment. So the murderer murders people through a TikTok dance. Which is quite interesting, but I've not considered, but that could be something to think ahead if you're filming narrative and trying to limit it to under a minute and telling a story using, because I think some of the TikTok transitions are really creative, but like Lisa's saying, I would have no idea how to do it, but the kids have got the expertise there, because some of the stuff that they make, that they show you on TikTok, that's just a little throwaway video, and then they don't have an idea for a film, or they don't have an idea what to do with a certain bit of their film, and you're like, well, look what you've managed to do here. Do you know?
Right. There's maybe something actually in the idea of, you know, when you're teaching narrative theories, like, right, okay, well, show me that you've learned this by doing this part of the narrative theory through the form of TikTok. Maybe not as a filmmaking thing, but as like a support for the theory, perhaps. Sam, did I cut you off? Were you going to say something?
I was just saying it's interesting because it's like, I was thinking back to Vines. If anyone remembers Vines, the 6-second videos.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some really fascinating examples of how Vines were used how can you create a horror in 6 seconds? How can you create a comedy in 6 seconds? And so and in the same with TikTok, the very, very genre specific, very stylized, hyper conventionalized examples, I think it can be really fun as well.
Mm. Yeah, totally. Mr. Corbett's just joining in there as well, saying that I have a PSA for COVID based on a TikTok dance as an assignment piece, which was actually really funny, and they were able to engage with what was expected from it really well. So that's kind of echoing, I guess, what you've said, Sam, as well. So that is us at, according to my clock, 17:32, which brings us to the end of the session today. I just want to thank you all for coming and remind you that the Scottish International Film Education Conference is on the 17th and 18th of June. I think Flip or Jamie are going to share a link in the chat there for that. So we'll be hoping to see you there for a little bit more conversation around film education. But apart from thanking our wonderful panel who are here today, and just reiterating that call for if anybody is feeling they want to chat more or that they're doing this alone, please do feel free to get in touch with absolutely any of us. We are all willing to chat and talk and kind of bounce ideas around. But yeah, thank you very much for coming, and thanks to the panel.